Hi, Com 315 students. We have a special guest with us today. I'll take a moment just to introduce him, and then we'll talk about a few things related to the subjects that are on your mind right now. So I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Shawn Wahl, who is the Dean of the Judith Einhart Reynolds College of Arts and Letters. He is a professor of communication with many accomplishments and publications in many areas of interest, including an area that will be on the minds of students in advanced public speaking right now, which is persuasion. Dr. Wahl has written several textbooks, for example, including one called Persuasion in Your Life. And so, Dr. Wahl, thanks very much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, one of the things that I wanted to ask, and we'll get over here to my list of questions, is so my students are interested in strategic planning processes, and I know that there's a lot of projects that are underway in our college, as well as in the university. None of those happen by accident, of course. They all take a lot of planning and preparation up front. I've heard word of a lot of interesting projects that are coming up in the next little bit. For example, there's the creation of a new art park here near Craig Hall. So I wanted to start just by asking you, what are some of the projects that are coming up that you are excited about?
Certainly. So about a year ago, it's been exactly a year ago, Missouri State University launched the Onward Upward campaign. I think many of the students in this class will likely remember that there were banners all over Springfield and beyond that said "It's On." So "It's On" was obviously the rollout or launch of the campaign, Onward Upward for Missouri State University, which has a goal of raising $250 million, which is a tremendous amount of private money. And what that private money does, first of all, the process for that campaign is chaired by, I would say, probably one of or the most famous Missouri State alums, John Goodman, which is really exciting. And so the overall, if you just think of the list of things that a campaign does, it's about student scholarships, it's about making college more affordable, and then there's also structural aspects of it as well, where it might help us build any sort of new space that benefits athletics, the arts, any of our academic programs. If you look at structures that are essential to the university, such as the Welcome Center, other centers on campus, other facilities on campus. So that's in general what a campaign does. It helps the university establish a bold vision of the future. So we have to think about, not just a few years down the road, but 20 or 30 years down the road. And so any comprehensive major campaign is not something that a university does every year. You may do it every 10 years or more. And so we were at a point where we were due to launch a robust, comprehensive campaign, which brings in, we hope, a substantial amount of private money. And so that's what Onward Upward is about. And I'm happy to report, as of today, we've been very successful in taking major steps towards that goal. And one of the things that was in the rollout of the Onward Upward campaign was to establish a permanent tent theater structure that will resurrect outside of Craig Hall and transform the whole area around Craig and Ellis Hall, as well as Hill Hall, into an arts park. And so it's going to benefit the entire community and region, whether that's high school students, junior high students coming to campus for debate, the Missouri Fine Arts Academy, performance events, slam poetry, jazz festivals, all those things that make the community great, that will help the university continue to be the front porch of the university for the arts as well as other areas. And so we are continuing to move forward. That was a vision. And so if you're thinking about the the notion of what is a vision for an organization. That is something that is what I would describe as aspirational. And so the Arts Park and Tent Theater was something that was part of our vision even years ago. It was part of our aspiration of, what the future is. And so it's really exciting that we're kind of living in that moment of shaping what that structure looks like. And, we can't do it without the generous support of friends of the university, alumni, really across the world. So that's a little bit of an update there. And, you can't get to tangible physical structures being built without a vision. And so this is really I think a case study in people having, say 10 years ago, having really big ideas to say this is something that could transform campus. And it's just one project that we're working on. And I suspect that we'll see that vision come alive in 2022, 2023. That's where we are right now. Of course, construction projects can always be delayed or they could accelerate, but that's tentatively what our plan is at the moment.
That's fascinating. And so you're talking about a long-range plan, a big vision. One of the things I'm curious about is what goes into the creation of that vision. Who are the people at the table who help to create that vision? And feel free to, as we discuss this, what we can talk about the college specifically or the university, which I know is also engaged in a long-range plan. And I mentioned that my students will be aware that we've also looked at like the master plan for the city of Springfield, Vision 2020, or the upcoming master plan Field Guide 2030. There must be a lot of different inputs in creating plans like that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So I referred to the Onward Upward campaign, which does have a number of steering committee members. The chair happens to be John Goodman, but that's for the entire university. I mean, that's for every aspect of the university, as I said, student scholarships. And that's truly a fundraising campaign that will live over several years in order to get to our aspirational goal of raising $250 million, which we've made tremendous progress in just a year. So to look at a different example, obviously you have other examples that you're engaged in this class, but another one related to Missouri State University that I'm involved with is the long-range planning process for Missouri State University. And I happen to be the co-chair of the steering committee that we've been at work for a few months now. We're still in the early stages of that project. And so I can spend just a few moments talking about what goes into developing a process, whether that's a document, whether that's goals. There's a lot of outcomes. I mean, it can be outcomes that are related to data points. And so, as an example, you might have a goal in any organization that you want to increase something. So, if you want to increase the bottom line in terms of revenue production or business success, we would measure that by by the finances. Did the number of products sold increase by 10% in 2 years or 1 year, 10 years, whatever the range is or whatever the numbers are. And then in in a university environment, Missouri State, we have clearly over 20,000 students. And so as we look to the future, one goal might be, well, how large do we want to be? How many students do we want to have enrolled in a few years? And so then there's diversity goals. There may be goals related to study away, global engagement, the mission of the university, as many people believe should be involved, and we should reinforce the mission with any plan. So the first thing that goes into, and I can speak for the process that I'm working in right now, is you look at, well, what was the last plan? What did that look like? How did it go? Were the goals achieved? And the answer in our case is that we've done really well with the former long-range plan that we're finishing up currently. And so when you have a plan that, let's say it's a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, you then can look at it to see how the last process went. Did you meet the goals? And then you have to figure out, well, how did the process go in the past? A lot of it has to do with the leadership team. So obviously the president of the university and the board of governors are interested. So the process initiates there, where there's a discussion, and it's an open process where we figure out, well, how do we want this to go? And ultimately there's a process in place where there's a steering committee. You look at how the last, as I said, you look at like how the last plan went, and then there's a steering committee appointed. And what I'll talk about is my own expertise with strategic planning and what my recommendations are as far as guiding it for a nonprofit organization, a large university like Missouri State, or even a corporation. And I will say up front that there's not necessarily a prescription. It's not one way to do it. I think rather there's certain qualities or conditions that need to be in place in order for a long range plan or a strategic plan, whatever title. A lot of this is wordsmithing, but I think that there's certain conditions and qualities of the process that are important, because ultimately it's about motivating people and hopefully following the plan that makes an organizational structure stronger. Again, whether that's corporate, nonprofit, small business, this can be utilized for really anything across industries, education, oil and gas, healthcare. I happen to be experienced in healthcare, oil and gas, and education as far as this type of process goes, which is one reason I'm kind of drawn to it, to volunteer, to say I'm willing to help out with it. So having all that said, I would say that being transparent is very important, being open with the community, not only two terms that you might use in a course on business and professional communication, and something I talk about is internal. It's very basic, but an internal communication and external communication. So when we talk about internal communication, who are your constituencies within an organization? So here it would be the staff. We have phenomenal staff that work as advisors in facilities. And you just think about the library and what it takes, the number of people it takes for the library to work and to serve the community, to serve the students of Missouri State. So staff input's important. Then you have faculty, all of the professors and campus, including West Plains. I mean, that's certainly our 2-year campus, but even representatives from West Plains are aware of what the Missouri State system, what we're doing, and how they can contribute and fit in. Student input is important. So the current steering committee does have a student representative that it doesn't have to be, but it tends to be someone who's in SGA. That right now we have the vice president of SGA of the student body is part of the steering committee. And then you have, you don't necessarily have 50 or 60 people on a steering committee. I guess you could, but we happen to have, under 20 people. And with that committee, it's representation of faculty, representation of staff, students, and then you have people that may work in particular areas such as international education, our graduate and professional programs, representation from academic affairs, and those are just a few examples. And so I think that representation is important. And then I'm going to pause and turn it back to you to see if I'm hitting on the question here. But there's a certain process you then put in place that at least a suggested process that I can talk about, but that at least gives some sense of the general preliminary structure.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that's super fascinating. Let me go back to something you said about the internal and the external groups, the internal being staff, faculty, and you were talking about the steering committee of 20 individuals. Can you talk more about the external factors?
Certainly. So looking at external communication, while alumni, as we say at all of our commencements, you're not only at Missouri State and a bearer for a few years, but we want you to be a bearer for life. And so therefore we are interested in alumni perspective. We're interested in the community, and the community goes beyond Springfield. We're a state institution. So how does Missouri State do good things in the best interest of the public good? How do we foster public affairs when you look at the pillars of public affairs? And so we talk about community. It's not just around Springfield. It's also, what do we do good for Bolivar? What do we do for Southwest Missouri and across the whole state? Because many of you in the class are from Kansas City, St. Louis. Some of you might be from outside of the state, but for the second largest university in the state of Missouri, we certainly are interested in business, people who are nonprofit leaders, corporations, people who work in public and private education, in healthcare. You can't capture every industry across the entire region, but an alumni perspective is important. Friends of the university, donors, people who are on advisory boards with the Missouri State University Foundation, alumni. And also we have people who are supportive of the university who might not be alumni. You might have people in local government, state government, part of various services. So anything that we can do to kind of spread those different points. I don't know. I'm thinking of the notion of input. How do you capture input into the overall process? Because if you just focused on internal, which internal is essential, right, to this process, but if you exclude all of the constituencies and all the different areas and categories the university impacts across the region, we want to make sure that we're preparing students for jobs, to be competitive. But then there's also essential skills of essential skills of citizenship. So what does it mean to be a good listener? Empathy, interpersonal skills, all the things that you study in the communication major or minor. Those things matter not only for educating good citizens, but also what does it mean to be a good mom? What does it mean to be a good father, to be a good neighbor? Those are all things that are about ethical leadership. And so that's a lot to say, but yes, but the external input is very, very important in order for the university to accomplish its key mission of public affairs.
Yeah, you mentioned listening, and that's very close to my heart, as it's one of my favorite classes. And jumping off or sticking with the citizenship point for a moment, I'd like to focus on that and change gears a little bit. Let's think about the steering committee and the strategic planning process as a representative of or prototypical of the various types of decision-making bodies that exist in our society. And this will move us to my last question here. Let's say that just a person who's a stakeholder or a private citizen wants to contribute and make their voice heard in a setting where it'll matter. They want to advocate, for example, for some cause at a relevant planning meeting. My question is, what advice would you give to those individuals? How should they conduct themselves so that their presentation will be, as effective as it can be?
That's a really great question, because it focuses on something that is so basic and fundamental. And when you see someone, any citizen in any community, when you think about the notion of civility and how public opinion is formed, and anyone in the class that's enjoys political science, or who's taken political science, government, whatever it might be, there's thinkers like John Dewey, who wrote about the public, and as the title of the book suggests that I'm thinking of, it's the public looking at really political participation. How are people involved in business of the people, right? So I'm going to, refer to an example that I refer to quite often when I'm teaching courses like persuasion, in many courses. But when you really get into political theory and political participation and how that intersects with communication studies, something that comes up is how do you impact, as I like to say, how do you move the needle of opinion? So if you want, if you're favorable towards X, Y, or Z, whatever the topic is, one way that you can create change or impact change. You hear a lot of that about voting. Vote for change. And so the only way that you're and a lot of this stuff is actually, we throw a lot of these phrases around, they almost become cliche, but in order for people to really believe in it, you have to say it so many times to make it stick. But I think that something that really stands out when you look at political style, political decorum, and I'm not talking about politicians. We're in a very politicized time in the world, but when you look at what it means to be a citizen, I think that locality and the face-to-face community is really important to think about. So showing up in the condition of the world we're living in right now, we have a lot of electronic town halls. We have a lot of things that actually some can argue, or part of the argument is that there's more access. But if you have something that is an electronic town hall, when you want to say that there's more access and that it breaks down barriers, we have to remember that not everybody has access to Wi-Fi. Not everybody has access to technology. And so there's a little bit of a big slope that's there. But I think that in terms of engagement and vocalizing, your opinion, for your opinion to matter, I think that to contribute to civility, that's very important. And so this, to me, kind of connects to things to things we talk about and write about in interpersonal communication, such as politeness, following a certain protocol. Just like in an online course, there's certain protocol. If you write it to another student in a discussion forum or something like that, that you'll be taken more seriously if you focus on decency, ethical communication, kindness. That said, in order for your voice to be heard, it doesn't mean that there aren't situations where you're going to have to be resistant, or excuse me, I should say persistent, and making sure that you raise your hand, just like we have in Zoom. We have the raise your hand feature. But in my opinion, there's nothing that's more meaningful, whether it's at City Hall in a large community, a mid-size or small town, than someone going in and saying, my name is so-and-so, and this is where I live, or this is the identity that I have as a small business owner, as a father, as a public educator, as an attorney, as a doctor, whoever we are. And I think that representation matters.
That's such a good point.
Yeah, it's that's I have a lot to say about it, but I think political participation, that actually showing up and realizing that no one can take your right to express yourself, your right to speak away, because you don't make as much money as someone else, or you're not in the right industry. Yes, we have systemic issues. Yes, there's economic barriers. Absolutely, there's social class challenges. There's so many things that we could talk about. There's whole classes and degrees in what we're really talking about here, and lives that we're talking about here, and voices that we're talking about here, voices that are heard, voices that are excluded. But as far as participation goes, I think showing up, and also it's more of a utopic or idealistic version of democracy or of public opinion, but also writing in what your concerns are. The dark side of this is what I talk about as the dead letter office, where where if you think back to junior high and in high school or basic government or political science, it's all about write your senator, write the mayor. Well, your voice is not going to be heard unless if you put something in writing or you go to the town square and you say what needs to be changed. It's lots of perspectives on this, lots of different opinions and ways to get out. What is civility? Who am I to say what that is? But I think that engagement, decency, following rules, following protocol, I think that those are things that come to mind.
Engagement, decency, civility, protocol, and then at the same time, willingness to be persistent, and to identify oneself as where one lives. I think all of that is such good advice. I notice in my students, there's a shyness to like a hesitance to be personal, and to bring their personal story to their persuasion. And I do think that's a missed opportunity, because that's a big part of our identity and what motivates us to do our advocacy. The more I think about this, the more I see that whether a person wants to try to influence a steering committee, for example, or whether someone is on a steering committee and wants to influence and wants to do the steering, it's the same skill set, right? We're still talking about civility. We're still talking about persistence and protocol. And it seems like at the end of the day, decisions are made by those who show up and those who have their voices heard.
Right. And if you think about representation, if you see in any organizing structure, whatever the topic is, whether it's a long-range plan, working on the vision statement, working on the bylaws, forming any kind of governance document, again, depending upon what industry we're talking about, depending upon what context is huge, right?
Yeah.
But if you see something, or whether you observe or you feel, let's say you feel excluded or you don't see representation in a structure, and I'm thinking of a very kind of everyday example. But if someone points out to let's say there's a steering committee for the plan of a hospital or a community visioning process, and there's someone from a particular zip code or area of the city that's not included, and you notice that, you could talk to your friend or talk to your neighbor to say, well, they don't have anyone from our area, from our neighborhood. There's, I'll use gender as an example. So gender may come in. There may be no women represented. There may be people from particular affiliations there's an absence, and you could say that it wasn't intentional, but if you notice something that could be better and you vocalize, give your feedback to say, we don't have anyone from our zip code or our area represented. Is there someone, let's say, for example, in healthcare, if you have someone who is a nurse, let's say there's no nurses on a board or on a committee. Well, nurses are a really important part of healthcare. And if you don't have a nurse representation, that's problematic in my opinion. So that's just a very basic example. So if you see an absence, it's important to say something. And in normal situations, again, it depends, but I think in a normal civil situation, I think that there'll either be a reason for why there is someone who is not participating, who's been invited, and they may just say, well, of course, thank you so much for the suggestion. And then all of a sudden there'll be a nurse representation. And in some cases they might say, oh, you're a nurse at so-and-so hospital. Would you like to participate? We actually would love for you to be a member of the committee, and it may turn into an opportunity for you.
That's a great example. Absolutely.
And I also have to say that there are also there's also, and I don't mean to promote corruption, but there's also situations where unconscious and conscious decisions are made for people to be left out.
Sure.
And so again, I don't mean to be cynical, but because there are organized, conscious reasons for people to be excluded, that's another reason to be vocal. And then in some cases it's unconscious. And both conscious and unconscious relegation or exclusion is problematic.
Yeah. Well, I know that we could talk about these issues forever, but we've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and I think you've given my students a lot of food for thought, as well as a lot of inspiration as they think about how best to construct their persuasive appeals that they'll be working on this semester.
Thanks again for the invitation. And since this is a communication class, I always like to say, go calm and go Bears.
Go Bears.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule, Dr. Wahl.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Take care.